All right. Okay, I'll just reiterate it. Yep, I'll just reiterate. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to House Economic Matters. Today's Thursday, January 23rd. It is 1 p.m. We have 5 bills and 26 witnesses on our list. Before we jump in, just a reminder for everybody, I know it's still very early in the session. We have this new system. If you could just speak loudly into the microphones, it is very challenging to hear people. That's not any one particular person. It's just been difficult with the mics picking up audio. First bill, we have House Bill 128, and I do want to recognize our peers from from E&T, as the bill is jointly assigned. We have delegates Ruth, Morgan, and Speaker Pro Tem Stein. With that, Delegate Fraser-Hidalgo, go ahead and begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's okay to bring my panel up? Thank you. Colleagues, thank you very much for taking the time. I'm here to introduce House Bill 128. You all are familiar with this bill. We had a version of this bill very close to the same thing last year, so I'm going to just try to go through it a little bit to refresh everybody's recollection. House Bill 128 is responding to the emergency needs of extreme weather, or the RENEW Act. Essentially what this does is create a super fund to help pay for all of the damage that has been done, or some of the damage that's been done in the state of Maryland as a result of climate change. As you all know, or well know, the fossil fuel industry has known for over 40 years, close to 50 years, that burning fossil fuels is the leading cause of greenhouse gas emissions, carbon, everything that we see here. So the bill simply establishes a fund. It goes after the fossil fuel industry, and it tells them that they need to help pay for some of the destruction that's happened in the state of Maryland when we think about stormwater management, when we think about sea level rise, when we think about public health, when we think about all those things. It shouldn't just be on the backs of the Maryland taxpayers. Think about it similarly in some respects to tobacco. Tobacco is knew for decades that smoking causes cancer. They had scientists determine that smoking causes cancer, and they buried it all. The fossil fuel industry did the same exact thing. So the bill requires any company that has emitted more than 1 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions since 1994, so the last 30 years, to pay a one-time fee for the detrimental impacts and emissions. Essentially, what this would do with those companies, think about the main companies you're talking about. They're not Maryland-based companies. Doesn't hurt Maryland. They're not Maryland-based companies. ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, those are the kind of players that we're talking about. That would generate about $900 million, so a total of $9 billion to help with mitigating the issue. It also sets up a study to best figure out how to collect and how to spend the money that we get. I will tell you that the state of New York and the state of Vermont have already done this, as well as many jurisdictions around the country. This is the leading trend. This is what's happening. I have no doubt, and I'm sure many of you don't have any doubt as well, that the fossil fuel industry will fight this, and you will hear from the fossil fuel industry on subsequent panels that the sky is falling and the sky is falling. And the sky really literally is falling, so that's why we have to work on, we have to pass this bill. And for those of us in this committee that were here an hour and a half ago, we got briefed. We know what the outlook is for the future of our state, fiscally speaking. So now more than ever, the taxpayer should not have to bear the brunt of climate change alone. So with that said, I'd like to pass it to and then we'll do questions afterward, Mr. Chair. Okay, thank you.
Hello, Vice Chair Crosby, Speaker Pro Tem, Economic Matters Committee, and also Environment and Transportation members who are here. I'm Brittany Baker, the Maryland Director of Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and I urge a favorable report on HB 028. This bill uses strict liability principle to ensure that the largest, most polluting fossil fuel companies are being held strictly liable for the impacts of climate change. Just as you know, we just discussed some of the impacts that we're experiencing in the state. Literally, if you took a dart and threw it to any part in the state, you will land on a place that has more frequent and intense climate change impacts, and these impacts are costing Marylanders now. The purpose of this bill is to cost shift these unavoidable costs off of Marylanders and onto the largest, most polluting fossil fuel companies who emitted over 1 billion tons of greenhouse gases over the liability period. The liable companies for this one-time assessment are not headquartered in Maryland. This bill has no effect on Maryland utility companies or Maryland gas stations. This bill has no negative effect on Marylanders, only positive effects. There will be no pass-through costs due to basic economic principles. You can review the testimony from economist Michael Livermore in the file, and also links in my testimony to reports that discuss why there will be no negative economic impacts. This legislation is prudent and timely and popular. Gonzalez polling conducted 3 weeks ago showed that 71% of Marylanders are supportive of this legislation, and Attorney General Brown continuously submits favorable testimony on this legislation. Again, this is taxpayer relief legislation that is overdue. I request a favorable report.
Make sure you talk right in.
Sure. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is William Piermate. I'm the Managing Director of the Environmental Law Program at the University of Maryland Carey School of Law. I'm here testifying on my own behalf and not representing the views of the law school. So the RENEW Act is essentially a bill modeled after the polluter pays principle, which undergirds our environmental laws and a lot of our tort laws. Specifically, it's modeled after the federal Superfund bill that was designed to look retroactively at companies who made a mess and force them to clean it up and pay for it. It's also modeled after Senator Van Hollen's similar bill introduced into the federal Senate, but at this point, I don't think we can count on the federal government to really address the harms of climate change. So Maryland's on their own. So now, as mentioned, New York and Vermont have passed similar bills. The American Petroleum Institute recently filed a lawsuit challenging Vermont's bill. And looking at and they're almost all U.S. constitutional law claims, what I can say is looking at the challenges as well as the available precedent, I'm very confident that Maryland's police powers to regulate businesses who do business in this state would be upheld under current precedent. It's very similar challenges were made to the federal Superfund bill in the 1980s. They were all upheld. So this is not regulating future conduct. What this is doing is asking for compensation for damages that products caused in Maryland as a condition for doing business in Maryland, and that's well within the police powers of Maryland. The essential legal test is a legitimate legislative purpose, which this certainly has. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Seeing no questions, I want to thank this panel. Next, Delegate Morgan.
Is there any interstate commerce costs that this affects?
It doesn't affect, so the Dormant Commerce Clause essentially tries to say that you can't favor Maryland businesses to the detriment of businesses around the state. As was pointed out by Delegate Hill, it's not affecting Maryland businesses at all. It's not favoring Maryland businesses at all. Therefore, there shouldn't be a Commerce Clause problem. California, the Supreme Court decided a very recent case about pork producers in California regulating how hogs could be grown around the country if you want to sell them in California. The Supreme Court said that's perfectly fine. It's a legitimate state interest. I would put forth that the state interest here is so much more important than the ethical treatment of hogs. So it's hard to imagine how this wouldn't fit in with that line of cases.
Thank you.
And also, furthermore, that there's the AG's letter should be in your packet, and it addresses some of that in the AG's letter, specifically from the state of Maryland's perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this may be a complex answer and may be can you just give a really brief summary of how we can identify what portion of the cause goes to different corporations and how we can identify what the fee would be?
Yeah, it's based on the tonnage of pollution. So the more they polluted, the more that they pay. And I don't know if you want to add more to that, Brittany.
The carbon majors information is publicly available, and just as Delegate Frazier-Hidalgo stated, it's proportional, but we will use the first year of the bill, the implementation, to quantify the costs in Maryland, and that will be the new information that we have to create, and exciting information to create to really see how much is this costing the state, all the impacts of climate change.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the sponsor and witnesses for your presentation. I know or imagine the opponents are going to say that there could very well be a cost or price impact to consumers in Maryland after these fees are assessed. I know your position is that there wouldn't be, it would be sort of absorbed by the market, but could you provide a little bit more detail as to why you think that what is going to be their argument is not correct?
Sure, I'll start, and then I'll let Brittany chime in. But my understanding of the way that fossil fuels are moved, particularly like gas, diesel, is that they're not putting it into from a pipeline perspective, they're not going to a specific state. So there's not necessarily an easy way from them to determine whether that molecule or that particular drop of oil or gasoline is going to Maryland, or whether it's going to Pennsylvania, or whether it's going to Virginia. And I'll let Brittany kind of talk a little bit more about that.
Right, so gas is sold on a regional market, and then also we see there are no utility companies or gas companies here, because if they were expecting this to affect them, they would really be here speaking up. But in Michael Livermore's testimony, I'll just highlight some of the key pieces. In our market economy, companies charge prices that maximize their profits based on the cost of production and demand. So this assessment will not impact the revenue maximizing price or quantity of fossil fuel produced. Since companies are already charging the profit maximizing price, they cannot pass on the cost of the assessment to consumers by increasing prices without decreasing their profits. So if any particular company increased their price, they would see fewer customers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for the gentleman from the law school. So a lot of the opposition testimony talks about this idea of retroactive, retrospective, and saying therefore it might be unconstitutional. It seems to me that consistent with sort of cigarette and opioid and other lawsuits, it would sort of hold up. But I'm just wondering if you want to speak to that from a legal perspective of why we believe that it is constitutional and it doesn't run into problems with the retroactive sort of concepts.
Sure. And as I mentioned, so the federal Superfund legislation essentially said you have to pay for disposal you did 40 years ago. Even at the time, it was legal. But the courts have unanimously held that up as that's perfectly appropriate because it is for a legitimate legislative purpose. It's not punishment, it's compensation because your products, the products you sold over the last 30 years are doing damage now in the state. So similar to dumping toxic waste in a landfill you're not supposed to. So I don't see how it's different than the federal, the analysis for the federal Superfund legislation.
And the state of Hawaii recently upheld, their Supreme Court had a similar case, and it was upheld.
Okay, seeing no further questions, that concludes this panel. Next, we will go to Ken Phillips, Katie Mettle, Jorge Aguilar, and Valerie Fox.
Thank you, everyone.
Yep, you can start when ready.
Me? Oh, boy. Okay, here we go. Hi, ECM. So, Chair Crosby, friendly faces of ECM. I am Katie Mettle, and I am, as of August last year, the Maryland Policy Principal for Advanced Energy United. We are an industry association that represents companies operating in the clean energy space. Our mission is to accelerate the transition to a 100% clean energy economy. Our member companies include, but are not limited to, companies which manufacture and sell electric school buses. This bill will establish a mitigation fund and supply it primarily with cost recovery payments. This fund will be used for many purposes, including supplying money to the Zero Emission Vehicle School Bus Transition Fund and installing clean energy retrofits in buildings. These investments will not only benefit our member companies, but will benefit the state by stimulating economic activity, saving ratepayers money, and growing the clean energy economy generally. We respectfully request the committee issue a favorable report. Thank you for your time. I know, I'm like sweating over here, but that might just be the room. Yeah. I'm ready.
It's been indicated that I'm next. I am the Reverend Ken Phelps. Well, first of all, Chair Crosby and members of the committee, I'm the Reverend Ken Phelps of the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland. I also am here as the co-chair of the Maryland Episcopal Public Policy Network, which incorporates all three of the dioceses which comprise this state, over 200 and some congregations. You have my written testimony. The Episcopal Church and the Diocese of Maryland embrace this bill. We think that it is only fair that those who have denied or ignored the science for so many years pick up the tab, if you will, for those who really suffer the impact of this and cannot afford it. It's a personal thing for me, too, because my son and his family lost their home in Palisades in the wildfires that occurred and are still raging in California. I think what I want to say, though, is what is it going to take for us to have a serious conversation about what's going on? The United Nations says this is the defining moment for us. Earlier, the sky really is falling. And what will it take to bring us all to the table to take this seriously and finally talk about our climate? From a Judeo-Christian perspective, the first creation myth in the book of Genesis, we miss the point of it. The point of it comes at the end when we're given dominion over the earth. And dominion doesn't mean to dominate. It means to exercise good stewardship so that everyone, as the Lord's Prayer says, gets their daily bread, gets a share of the goodness of the earth. We see this as, again, we request a favorable report. This is another good step toward having what I've said we hope is, honest conversations about the extreme danger that we are now facing.
Hello, my name is Jorge Aguilar, and I am the Southern Region Director for Food and Water Watch. Thank you, Chairman Crosby and committee for hearing this bill. We want to express our support on behalf of our 44,000 supporters in Maryland for the Renew Act. We just want to echo what has been said by the sponsor. Ultimately, we believe, all of us, I think, believe in the spirit that we should make polluters pay. This is a revenue raiser in a moment of time when we have to deal with our changing climate, and we always have to adapt and be resilient in terms of this reality. So we often talk a lot about disasters and these extreme storms and wildfires, but they are everyday issues that our municipalities are having to contend with. So for instance, Baltimore City just yesterday raised its water bills to pay for really having to adapt to a changing climate. It has a lot of other issues related to it being an old system, but this is just exactly what is happening every day in all of our municipalities, and the costs are being borne by residents. And so this will continue. So the choice before you really is, it's going to get more expensive. The choice before you is, are you going to pass this cost on to all of your constituents, or are we going to find a new avenue for raising the money it's going to take to deal with a lot of these issues in the next coming decade? This is the moment to take action on this, and this is an elegant bill that addresses that. So thank you, Delegate Frazier Hidalgo, and we urge you to support this bill.
Hi, I'm Valerie Fox, and I'm not here with any organization. I just live here. And I just want to say that I don't think taxpayers like myself should pay the cost of the reckless business practices of fossil fuel companies. For a new act, it's the right thing to do. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Seeing no questions for this panel, that concludes this bill hearing. Oh, no, I apologize. We have two virtual. First, we'll go to Stacy Hartwell. Go ahead when ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Stacy Hartwell. I am the legislative and strategic advisor for the South County Environmental Justice Coalition. Black and brown communities have long borne the heaviest toll of fossil fuel extraction and combustion, enduring disproportionate harm for generations. Today, as climate change accelerates, these same communities are at the epicenter of its most devastating impacts, paying the ultimate price with literally their lives, homes destroyed, and financial devastation deepened by the loss of generational wealth. The cost of the climate crisis are unavoidable and accelerating. In fiscal year 2023, Prince George's County allocated $150 million to combat flooding and bolster resilience. St. Mary's County spends $950,000 annually to upgrade stormwater systems in response to heavier rainfall, while Annapolis has committed $54 million to protect its downtown from chronic flooding. By 2040, Maryland is projected to require billions for seawalls and coastal defenses. Maryland faces a daily and increasingly deadly onslaught of climate impacts, including saltwater intrusion on the eastern shore, widespread flooding, extreme heat in urban areas, reduced crop yields in farming communities, sea level rise across 3,000 miles of coastline, and increasingly severe weather events such as tornadoes and extreme winter storms. In Charles County, septic backups and groundwater pollution compound these challenges. These escalating issues demand urgent action to protect Maryland's future. Renew prioritizes vulnerable populations, including low-income households and marginalized racial groups who have been excluded from industrial benefits while disproportionately suffering from its harms. For these reasons, the South County Environmental Justice Coalition supports Renew.
Thank you, Ms. Hartwell. Justin Flagg.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman and committee members. My name is Justin Flagg. I'm the Director of Environmental Policy for New York State Senator Liz Krueger, who's the sponsor of the Climate Change Superfund Act, which is the New York version of the Renew Act. We know that climate crisis causes extreme weather events that are not only disruptive and deadly, but also very expensive. We estimate that the statewide cost for New York to adapt to the impacts of climate change could easily exceed $500 billion over the next several decades. That's at least $65,000 per household. That's money that New Yorkers are already paying. So the climate crisis is an affordability crisis, but our Superfund will be delivering $3 billion a year to help relieve some of that burden. And that money comes from the largest multinational oil and gas producers, not from New Yorkers. One question we often hear that has already come up today, won't the big oil companies just pass this cost along to consumers? And the answer is no, because they can't. We've had many economists weigh in on this, including a Nobel Prize winner, and they all agree that the costs won't be passed along for several reasons. The price of crude oil is set by the global market, so a company like Exxon can't raise oil prices even if it wanted to. In addition, the Superfund assessment is a one-time compensation for past activities, so it doesn't impact the cost of production. If a company's cost of production remains the same, its price point for maximizing profit remains the same. The assessments on different companies will vary from zero to hundreds of millions of dollars annually, so competitive pressure will prevent price increases. And the fact is that we're already paying for 100% of the costs of climate adaptation. You can't pass along a cost to someone who's already paying it. There's no question that these costs have to be paid. The only question is who will foot the bill. And in New York, we chose to give our taxpayers and businesses $75 billion of relief and make the polluters pay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Seeing no questions, that concludes this bill. I want to thank again the members from E&T from coming over. Next, we will go to House Bill 121, Delegate Charkoudian. You can bring up your panel and start when ready.
I just pushed my button now.
Republicans love this bill now, I heard. Chair Crosby, colleagues. For the record, Delegate Lorig Charkoudian here asking for a favorable report on House Bill 121. As you all, this is the bill that requires voting transparency for Maryland utilities for their votes at PJM. So quick refresher, we had a chance to spend an hour and a half with the folks at PJM, and many of us asked a lot of questions about PJM rules that seem really bad for our communities. PJM rules that seem bad for ratepayers, PJM rules that seem bad for resource adequacy, PJM rules that seem bad for a clean energy transition. And the question that one has to ask when you see rule after rule that's not good for our folks is, where are those rules coming from? And so you back up a little bit and you say, who's setting the rules at PJM? And the stakeholders set the rules at PJM. The members set the rules at PJM. Well, who are the members and who are the stakeholders? Well, the members at PJM are primarily, with a few exceptions of ratepayer advocates from whom we're going to hear in a bit, but primarily the vast majority of the folks with votes at PJM are incumbent utilities, that's like the Exelon utilities, and incumbent generators. So primarily fossil fuel generators, although also renewable generators. So the people who are setting the rules at PJM that are not working for our communities are the people who have a direct ability to benefit from those rules. And if you recall, when I was asking PJM questions about price caps and the price on capacity markets, the answer from PJM was that all of the market players understood the rules. And I said, of course they understood them, they wrote them. And so, the folks who don't understand them, of course, are our ratepayers who are really struggling to pay their bills. So the way that decisions get made at PJM is there's higher level committees that are public, those votes are public, everybody has a chance to see how every company voted. But before a proposal can get to those higher level committees, it has to go through lower level committees. And the votes at the lower level committees are not public at all. They're not public to the people who are sitting in those meetings. So PJM, the utilities, they'll come and they'll say, if you have nothing else to do with your life, you can watch 400 meetings a year to see if there's discussions about something that's of interest to you. But even if you watch those 400 meetings a year, you actually still can't see how they voted, because the voting is a private process through a technical button pushing something that happens. In any case, you can't see it. So we still don't know. We know that a proposal passed or failed 20%, 80%, but we can't see who voted and how they voted. Unfortunately, because PJM is regulated by FERC and we don't get to control, for the most part, how their decision-making works, we don't have the ability to get full transparency on every vote from every member of PJM. But because the utilities themselves are the monopoly franchises that the state has granted to the utilities to behave in the public interest and to be regulated in the public interest, we do have the ability, and we have the constitutional and legal authority to require that the utilities that that are regulated in Maryland because they are given a monopoly to act in the public interest, we do have the ability to require that they disclose how it is that they voted in all of these lower level committees. And so what this bill does is it says that the utilities in Maryland who vote in these lower level committees are required to disclose how they voted in a report to the Public Service Commission at the end of every year. And so that'll provide more information for us about, are they doing this in the public interest? Are they doing it in their own shareholder return interest? It'll also pressure PJM to make the whole process more transparent. Right now, we have the same bill is being introduced, was introduced last year and with plans to introduce this year in Illinois, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia. Indiana plans to introduce it this year, and there's 3 other states that are where we have legislators who are considering introducing it. So as each state really moves forward, requiring our own utilities to be transparent in their votes, it'll continue to put pressure on PJM to shift their process to be more democratic and more transparent. I urge a favorable report, and thank you very much. No, you have to you leave it, yeah.
Okay. There we go. Chair Crosby, members of the committee, my name is Clara Summers, and I am the Consumers for a Better Grid campaign manager for the Citizens Utility Board of Illinois. I'm testifying in support of HB 121 and have also submitted written testimony. Consumers for a Better Grid is a watchdog holding grid operators like PJM accountable to consumers, states, and a clean, affordable energy future. Imagine if all of the committee votes here in Maryland, in the Maryland General Assembly, were secret, and only the votes of the state Senate were reported in full. Such a process would lack critical transparency and be undemocratic. And yet, the PJM stakeholder process is one such process. The issues there affect electric reliability, affordability, and the clean energy transition, but are not transparent. Recent issues going through the stakeholder process have large implications for Maryland, particularly with regards to Brandon Shores. In the Planning Committee, PJM stakeholders recently voted on a new process for CIR transfers. PJM stakeholders have also recently voted on updated rules for when plants must announce their retirements and how they should be compensated through reliability must run arrangements. These are the sorts of major issues we cannot see votes for. You may hear that PJM meetings are public, but there are over 400 meetings per year and none of them are recorded. Even if you are present, as you heard, when a vote is taken in one of these lower level committees, you will not know how individual firms voted. There is also the potential for abuse of market power in PJM. Holding companies may be able to vote several times on an issue through their affiliates, which can vote in the lower level committees. That means certain companies have outsized influence on which proposals advance. HB 121 would shine a much needed light on the votes cast by electric utilities at PJM. The public has a right to know. Thank you, Delegate Terkudian, and I urge a favorable report.
Thank you. Timmy, before you start, David Lapp and Katie Metal, you're the last 2 witnesses on this. If you could just quietly come up to the table, that way we can be a little bit more efficient. Tammy, go ahead when you're ready. Sorry.
No problem. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the House Economic Matters Committee. My name is Tammy Bresnahan. I am the Senior Director of Advocacy for AARP Maryland, and we applaud Delegate Charkoudian for putting House Bill 121 in, and we support it. You might say, why? Well, I'm in here a lot on energy issues because utilities are very important to our population. You have my written testimony, and in there we go back to about 2017 when 22% of Maryland residents stopped taking their medication because they couldn't afford to pay their utility. I mean, they couldn't afford to address their rising utility cost. Well, today I was on a family listserv from Crisfield, Maryland, only to find out that people that maybe bring home between $1,000 to $1,500 a month are paying $1,000 a month in their this month utility bill from Delmarva. They need relief. This bill, we believe, as Delegate Charkoudian has laid out, to make it more transparent, to find out that to find out if people actually need to be paying the rates that they're paying. People are trying to turn their lights off. They're trying to, turn the heat down. They're trying to do everything they can there, but their rates are going up even before they turn their lights on. We believe that addressing these inequities in representation, like large energy companies like Exelon wield significant power over the RTOs, while state agencies like the PSC and the Office of the People's Counsel lack the resources and the capacity to match their presence. We also think that by passing House Bill 121, it will provide critical insight, like Delegate Charkoudian said, to policies that shape consumer energy bills, ensure Maryland utilities act transparently and align with the state energy and environmental goals, and for the last thing, to make rates reasonable. We ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Hi again, Katie Mettle from Advanced Energy United. We support this bill because PJM is a critical partner in bringing more energy online and building transmission to ensure that our entire region is able to meet our region's growing demand for energy. As the largest regional transmission organization in the United States, PJM has an incredible challenge before it because they are managing the constituencies of 13 different states plus DC. From our perspective, PJM has hit some speed bumps that have slowed down the process in bringing new energy generation online, particularly renewable energy such as battery storage and solar energy as well. We believe that increasing transparency in the decision-making process at PJM will enhance our states and other stakeholders' relationships with the organization and facilitate more effective partnerships and cooperation that will help us work together to bring this energy online faster. And we respectfully request that the committee issue a favorable report.
Good afternoon, Chair Crosby, members of the committee. David Lapp for the Office of People's Counsel. Thanks for the opportunity to testify today. Our office supports HB 121 because it will provide important insights into the activities of Maryland's utilities at PJM. Those activities impact Maryland electric utility customer bills, as we saw with last summer's 800% increase in the clearing price of the capacity market auction. PJM's dysfunctional capacity market rules have led to many calls for reforms discussed at PJM and in litigation at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Our office is litigating capacity market reforms in at least 7 new dockets just since October. But we have little insight on the positions of Maryland's utilities at PJM. And our office is actually a PJM member. In fact, Maryland utilities have significant influence over PJM policies that have led to a doubling of transmission costs over the last decade. As an illustration of that influence, last year PJM and the utilities owning transmission proposed to amend protocols governing transmission planning to give utilities unique rights and enable secret discussions between them and PJM. The agreement was soundly rejected by PJM members, but the PJM board approved the amendments anyway, and they were filed at FERC. Our office and many others challenged the proposed amendments, and in December, FERC agreed with us, also soundly rejecting them, stating they could give utilities undue influence over transmission planning and expansion. This bill may not have prevented that proposal, but it will provide critical insight into how Maryland's utilities vote on many policies vetted in PJM subcommittees, only some of which ever make it to the higher level committees. For more information, I'd refer you to our written comments. We ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think 3 of you, Delegate Charkoudian, David, and Katie, you all brought up something similar when it comes to the PJM, and I want to kind of dig in a little bit on that. As far as the markets are concerned and the increase of 800%, one of the things, I know that the PJM came last week to our committee, correct, Delegate Charkoudian?
Yes.
And did we not ask a lot of questions about the queue, what their queue is?
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Can I explain their queue?
Yeah.
You're right. So the queue is the process that a generator has to go through to find out what it might cost and to be able to interconnect into the grid. And so based on sort of management as well as rules at PJM, they reached a point where they had such a backlog that interconnections were taking 6 years for folks, 5-6 years for folks to get through. They finally had to close the queue, not accept new applicants. They accepted them, but put them in the pile, if folks remember the pile that we talked about. So they didn't run them through the queue. So essentially they haven't started their process. And so at this point, we have one of the reasons that we've significantly slowed down the amount of new generation being built in Maryland at a time where there's concern about resource adequacy, is because projects can't get through the queue, or by the time they get through the queue 5 years later, their financing has changed, and so they're not able to build while they would have built if they had gotten through the queue earlier.
And would you say, to some degree, all of these things are connected to the place that we find ourselves now when it comes to the queue or when it comes to our own generation and storage goals in the state of Maryland?
I think there's a lot of things that we're concerned about now. There's certainly some of the resource adequacy issues that we're concerned about now. There's transmission that folks are concerned about. There's rates that people are concerned about. There's the increase in capacity prices that people are concerned about. And all of those are a result of PJM processes and rules. And so while each one, you know, we could talk about CIR transfers, we could talk about RMR, like a very simple version, explanation of something that would be a rule that was created at this lower level, these lower level committees. You know, everyone sat here 5 years ago and knew that Brandon Shores was eventually going to close. We theoretically had years to prepare for that, whether it was going to be replaced with battery storage, solar, gas plant, whatever. We knew it was coming because of the economics. And yet when many of us went to PJM and said, let's talk about alternatives for what's going to happen, PJM said, well, the rule is they don't actually have to tell us until 3 months before they close. And we don't take action until 3 months before they close. So even though everybody in the market can see they're closing, PJM can't do anything until 3 months before they close. Well, at that point, the only options that are available at that 3-month point is to give an emergency permission to the Exelon companies to build transmission at a cost of $800 million to our ratepayers, and to turn around and have our ratepayers pay $250 million a year to Talon to keep that plant open. Both of those are not good outcomes for our ratepayers. Both of those could have been avoided if there had been a decision, if there had been a different process at PJM. So that's a very specific example of where an outcome could have been avoided, but because of the 3-month rule that PJM had, it only allows for that. Now you look at who benefits from that financially, it's the Exelon companies and Talon and other generators. So then you go back and you say, who's writing the rules? Well, those are the folks who are involved in these lower level committees writing these rules. And that's why, so there's so many things in that, resource adequacy, rates, all of that stuff, transmission. But that's why we're saying these decisions made at these lower levels are so crucial to all of these things we care about. And at the very least, we need to be able to see how the utilities that we regulate are voting in those settings.
So it's all connected?
It is all connected.
Thank you.
Yes, is the answer to your question, David.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question, I think, is for Ms. Summers, because she talked about the advocacy that, thank you for your advocacy and being here, and the advocacy that's done by other states. So if I'm understanding your, from an implementation standpoint, there are 5 of the 13 states that have put similar legislation in to do this transparency of the votes?
Yeah, at least last year it was 5. This year Indiana has also joined, and I would expect that there might be other states.
And so none of this legislation has passed in any states?
Not yet. I believe that it's fairly new. I mean, last year was the first year it ran in most of those other states.
Gotcha.
So, things takes time. People become more familiar with the material, but it's
so
certainly a groundswell.
So the biggest pushback then from PGM is what, they can't implement it, or what was the reason they?
I don't know that PJM has publicly taken a position on the legislation. I think it's more utilities concerned about their voting behavior being public.
Okay, so, but we're getting that same pushback, it seems, from all the states. Okay, that's what I want to know. Thank you.
Delegate Charkoudian, just to clarify, this bill, and I just read it, only deals with voting this year, correct?
It's only votes.
Okay.
Disclosure of votes.
Okay.
A report that discloses the votes.
And there, okay, and there is no.
See, sometimes it takes me a year to take your advice,
Yeah,
Mr.
I'm
Chair,
sorry.
but eventually I do.
It's also interesting that there is no oral opposition to that. I would have enjoyed that cross testimony. Okay, seeing no further questions, that concludes this bill hearing. Next, we will go to House Bill 270, which is me. David, you can just stay up there. And Brandon Hill, you can come up as well. I don't even know who these people are. Good afternoon, colleagues. For the record, Delegate Brian Crosby here to present House Bill 270, which is Data Center Impact Analysis and Report, and respectfully ask for a favorable opinion. That is simply what the bill does. It is a study that essentially studies the environmental, energy, and economic impacts of data center development in the state of Maryland. This legislation is similar to what was passed in the state of Virginia. It is significantly pared down from that and more narrow. But I do think that as the data center sector grows, we should know specifically what the true economic impact is, and then what does that do to our grid overall, and what is the energy impact. And throughout the debates on data centers, there have been numerous promises being made. There was obviously a tax incentive last year, and really what we want to see is what are those financial benefits, and do they outweigh the cost of energy and the impact on the grid that is going to have on Marylanders. And with that, I urge a favorable report. Go ahead, Lad.
Good afternoon again, members of the committee. David Lapp for the Office of People's Counsel. I'm pleased here to be here to testify in support of HB 270. While data centers are important for our digital economy, data centers bring substantial risks to residential customers because of their high energy demands. About a year ago, PJM allocated hundreds of millions of dollars in new transmission costs to Maryland customers that were primarily driven by 7.5 gigawatts of new power demand for new data centers located almost entirely in Northern Virginia. That is more demand on our system than our state's largest electric utility. We protested those costs for Maryland customers at the FERC, but lost, and now Maryland customers face significant costs for those transmission projects. Maryland customers will bear those costs even if all those data centers never actually materialize. In fact, there is a well-documented history of overestimates of growth in electricity demand from large customers, which can drive big profits for corporations that captive utility customers pay for. We can learn from the recent FERC decision and history. While PJM bears some responsibility for ensuring data centers have skin in the game before massive investments are made, Maryland and other states can take many actions before those investments are made, as well as to influence PJM policy. More information to know what we're dealing with will help that effort, and that is what HB 270 will help the state do. Data centers must be developed responsibly, consistent with state policies, including the protection of existing utility customers. And this bill will help the state do just that. Again, we filed written comments with further information. Thank you, and we urge a favorable report.
Hi, my name is Brandon Hill, and I'm a citizen activist. First, I'd like to say I sincerely appreciate everything being done regarding the issue of unrestricted and ill-conceived AI infrastructure projects. The definition of an AI infrastructure project refers to data centers, energy generation sources, transmission lines, and cooling structures/systems. Virginia data centers are currently using over 2.8 gigawatts of electricity to power themselves and millions of gallons of water a day for cooling. On top of this, Virginia plans on doubling the amount of data centers in their state. I want to point out Virginia and Maryland fall in the same regional transmission organization footprint, which is headed by PJM. That means we share the same generation facilities to power ourselves, which are mostly located in PA and West Virginia. Keeping this in mind, Maryland is currently courting several large-scale data center constructions, such as the Quantum Loophole Hyperscale Gigawatt Data Center campus in Frederick, with more data center constructions being proposed in Virginia and Maryland seemingly every day. Where will we get the electricity to power them and the water to cool them? The trajectory this industry is on is not sustainable, and that will be made clear if this bill is passed and the study begins. I strongly urge you all to push this bill through so it can be made crystal clear the scale of the negative impacts this industry represents for Maryland as it is proposed.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the delegate or the panel? Delegate Queen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question for the sponsor. Great idea, like the idea of having a study. You pattern this after Virginia. Just a question. How did Virginia choose the universities that are involved with it? Is it just the University of Virginia or other schools invited to participate?
I honestly don't know that answer. I apologize, but if we want to include it to be more than just University of Maryland and incorporate other ones, that's fair. I'd be open to including more people.
Delegate Howard.
Thank you. Does this study preclude or prohibit the negotiations or the building of a data center until it's complete?
No, it does not.
Thank you.
Delegate Harrison.
Thank you. This is it's a 2-year study, is what, I think is what I'm understanding. It'll take place effective July 1 of 2025 and be concluded in 2027.
Correct.
Is that, it's 2 years in Virginia as well?
I believe it is.
And
We predominantly took their language, sorry.
I'm sorry. Is it, do you really believe, well, I guess you do believe that it really it's going to take 2 years. And I guess it kind of goes back to Delegate Howard's question as to whether or not building would be prohibited during that time.
No, building won't be prohibited, at least not by this bill. No, I think that frankly, you know, if we're going to get into this game and into this business, we probably should wait to know all the factors, but that's also not a reality. And so there are, you know, the train's kind of left in some areas and it's not coming back to the station. We understand that. We're not trying to slow that down. We just want to know long-term, what are the impacts of this thing?
Okay.
And really what benefits are we going to gain?
Okay, because some of the opposition mentioned that they believe that it would slow down or delay the building and continuation of the growth of data centers. So I guess that's the impetus of the question in the 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they don't want to report. That could be negative for them. But, you know, if it's already, if the building's already built or the data center is already built, then it wouldn't have an impact. And then B, I would think that, yeah, there's a risk that the report would say it's going to gobble up a ton of energy and it's going to pawn off XYZ costs. I mean, at least that would be my theory, and we'll see if it proves true. But if it does, I think that would probably be used against them, right? So, like, they would probably be against the data center study if they're worried about the results, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for this panel? We do have a virtual panelist. I did not forget about you, Ms. Liu. We have Ms. Elizabeth Law, who is here to testify as well.
Chair C.T. Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby,
and members of the Economic Matters Committee. I'm asking for a favorable report. I'm a professional power engineer. I was a transmission planner for Con Edison of New York and worked 10 years for FERC in the Office of Electric Reliability. I am concerned that there has not been sufficient recognition of the immense power needs of data centers. Maryland already has a power deficit. At present, Maryland only generates 60% of its power demand. Hyperscale data centers consume as much power as a small city. The first hyperscale data center in Maryland, Quantum Frederick, projected to require at least 2,000 megawatts at full build-out. The proposed PSEG transmission line will only carry. This means each new hyperscale data center will need 2 or 3 such transmission lines. Without sufficient information, officials could risk making decisions that will stress the electric grid to the point of instability, change the character of the state to heavy industry, burden ratepayers to benefit one industry. Most of what has been broadcast about hyperscale data centers releases and paid for by the industry lobbyists. At present, the state does not have an accurate account of how many data centers exist, how many are projected, and what the power demand will be. The Data Center Impact Report would provide officials with accurate information from the agencies known for practical recommendations. The time frame of 15 months for producing a report and about 2 years for the full process is an undue burden on. It will not slow up any present building. Thank you. And I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Ms. Law. Are there any questions for Ms. Law? Delegate Adams.
For the, if that's
Okay,
all right.
thank you very much, Ms. Law. There are no questions for you, but there is a question for the panel sitting in front of us by Delegate Adams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this may be an oversimplification, but in my business, 20 years ago, we had a server, all of our computers come off the server to run the accounting program and some other applications. But I don't know, it was maybe 4 years ago, we ended up moving our accounting software into what's called the cloud, right? So the point is, I assume that we're probably talking about a data center. And my question is, I'll make a statement that I believe that we are using less energy in our business because of the fact that we really don't even need a server in our company anymore. We need computers, laptops, whatever the people are using, but we've kind of gotten away from the computer room, so to speak. So here's my question. Is your study going to look at perhaps the positive impacts of data centers in so much as it's going to change the behavior of computer usage, both on an individual or corporate basis, because you're centralizing the computing power, and basically all you're doing at that point could be just using your cell phone to do business? And are you going to be analyzing, in fact, the cost savings to the state by having it centralized that way?
So we would look at total impact of the energy. So I would think that that would be a factor that they would include. I don't know if it's going to go down to the individual computer level, but full disclosure, as somebody who builds mini data centers for very specific reasons for the DoD, I don't find what you're saying to be true. Like, you'll still have computers, laptops, et cetera, at your office. And so now, instead of just everybody storing files on their desktop, you typically store them on the cloud so that other people have access to that information. And so, A, the amount of information that we are storing as a people is significantly greater, and B, how we are storing them is different. And so I think that it's not just we opened up a data center, so now the local business takes away 2 computers. It's more like the local business still has 2 computers, and now the data center is backing up all the information on top of those 2 computers.
No, what I'm saying is that in my situation, which is this one small business, and we're not even talking about like heavy applications like CAD programming and different, I'm surely AI, is I'm telling you that I got rid of a server of some energy use. And we no longer need it, right? I mean, and so Microsoft, to take it a step further, I mean, we know as a
state that they are, is it New Jersey or Pennsylvania, they're trying to reopen a nuclear plant just to be able to handle their future computing needs for AI. I assume Microsoft then is going to do Windows through the same general principle, which is it's cloud-based, the computing energy use, the power, the whatever that used to be locally on a computer is going to be done in these data centers, right? I mean, so all I'm saying in this study, if the bill is going to pass, is that we should absolutely be looking at both sides of the equation, not just, okay, it's going to take X amount of energy to run a data center, but what's the savings? What's the, because I believe that is going to be, should be part of the study.
I would hope, and I mean, the study is neutral on it, so legislative intent, right, is that it looks at the net impact of data centers.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Ahrens.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Just a quick, easy question. This study, are you going to look into some of the policies that Maryland has regarding energy and energy generation? I know we're starting to finally recognize nuclear, we're finally looking at all that stuff, but the impact of a data center, even in Maryland, we are using more data. It's advantageous to business, it's advantageous to schools. It's a big deal for a lot of people, and it brings a lot of revenue. Are we going to revisit some of these things, or is that already in your mind?
No, it would simply look at what is the economic impact of data centers, what's the environmental impact of data centers, and what's the energy impact of data centers in the aggregate. I wouldn't think that it's going to relook at policy ABC from 2018. So
wouldn't you agree the impact, financial impact on that would be as if we had one here, job creation, power, access to everything would be important, and the inability for us to have the energy that they require because of maybe because of our policies. I'll give you an out there, but that to me would be paramount to see how we have to look at how we generate electricity in this state.
I don't think the economic impact is what you think it is, having built these things and service and maintain about 100 of them. No, it's about 2 guys for 100 data centers that we maintain. There's not this whoa and unbelievable economic output.
My access to information has an economic impact. I'm not necessarily sitting back saying a job creation, but the access to information definitely has an impact. The internet has an impact right now. I don't want to get a philosophical discussion. I just would hope we would include something like that because I think they're necessary. I do think that they bring revenue to the state. Wouldn't you agree?
Okay, I mean, that's why we're going to study them.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any other questions for this panel or for our virtual panelists? Seeing none, that concludes the bill hearings on House Bill 270. Thank you, Vice Chair Crosby. We'll now move on to House Bill 81, Delegate Mangione.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and the committee. I am Delegate Nino Mangione for the record from District 42A, and I am here on behalf of House Bill 81, the Protect Maryland Farmlands Act. This bill is very simple. It provides for the protection of Maryland's farmland if it is taken in condemnation proceeding, otherwise known as eminent domain. Regretfully, some of the most productive farmland in Maryland is under threat by an out-of-state company that wants to destroy our farming communities and their enterprises with unneeded power lines. It is vitally important that we protect our farmlands. Maryland has a deep, rich history in agriculture that benefits Marylanders and citizens across the entire country. We must do all we can to protect our farmlands and protect the economic value to our hardworking farmers. This bill, it adds a 350% premium to the highest appraisal of farmland taken by the eminent domain process. This premium, it recognizes the value of farmland, agriculture, and farmers across Maryland. We owe it to our farming community and the people who work in the farming industry to provide these protections. We must also never forget that it is this farmland that feeds Marylanders and the farmers that feed America by providing the food that we eat each and every day. And we must also remember that you do not develop rich, productive farmland overnight. I urge a favorable report on House Bill 81, and I thank the committee for allowing me to speak today.
Go ahead, sir.
I want to start by pointing out Maryland's largest commercial economy.
Sir, real quick, before you get started, you got to just announce your name for the
Oh, sorry. My name's
Very
Brandon
good.
Hill, and I'm an activist, a citizen activist. I want to start by pointing out Maryland's largest commercial economy is the agricultural sector. Roughly 32% of Maryland land is used as farmland, and the industry brought in a gross cash income of $3.8 billion in 2022. Maryland has a robust agricultural economy that is clearly working. The single greatest threat to that robust agricultural economy is unrestricted and ill-conceived AI or artificial intelligence infrastructure projects. AI infrastructure projects is defined as data centers, energy generation sources, transmission lines, and cooling structures and systems. Big tech and power transmission like Microsoft and PJM are pushing this false greater good narrative when these projects are only for the greater good of their bank accounts. Right now, there are several projects in the state of Maryland that fall under this classification that are threatening eminent domain on agricultural, conserved, preserved, and privately owned land. Projects like Quantum Loophole Hyperscale Data Center campus in Frederick that's threatening hundreds of acres of prime farmland, and the Maryland Piedmont Reliability Project that cuts from PA through 3 counties in Maryland to finally connect to Data Center Alley in Virginia. We need to take a stand now and protect the robust Maryland agricultural industry from this new and very serious threat. I believe this bill could make agricultural land less desirable to target for projects such as these, but I believe it doesn't go far enough. PSEG, the company threatening eminent domain for the Maryland Piedmont Reliability Project, is worth $44.3 billion. Instead of 3 times market value, it is my belief we should make the stakes even higher and force them to value agricultural land at closer to 10 times fair market value. Once farmland is used for projects like these, we won't get it back. If AI infrastructure projects continue to have the ability to take whatever they want under the guise of the greater good, Maryland's agricultural economy will be decimated completely in the next 10 to 20 years. I ask that you please push this bill forward with an increase to the valuation of farmland. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no, Delegate Howard.
Yeah, where'd you get 10 times? Who gave you that number?
Well, the number is, once you go through and create a project like this in Maryland, I got it because I pulled up this, can I answer the question? I pulled up this number, I created this number because I value farmland as invaluable. Once we take it away, once we destroy it, we will never get it back. That's years of production. You have to take into account years of production.
No,
it's not an arbitrary number because I'm valuing that once we lose it, we will not get it back. That's invaluable. To put a number on it is even arbitrary.
Are you like a
Everybody just take a deep breath.
speculator,
Hold
or
on, take a deep
Is that
breath.
what you do in your profession?
No, I own a farm though.
Speculator?
I'm not a speculator. I am an activist citizen and I'm telling you my beliefs.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Seeing no further questions, that concludes this bill hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next, we have Delegate Boafo for our final bill of the day, House Bill 145. And I have Katie Mettle, Henry Bogdan, and Paul Ellington.
All right. Delegate Howard. All right, Mr. Chair, members of the ECM Committee, for the record, Delegate Adrian Boafo here to present House Bill 145, the Green and Renewable Energy for Nonprofit Organizations Loan Program Act. HB 145 establishes a revolving loan program to fund environmental infrastructure projects for Maryland nonprofits using allocation from the SEEF Fund, the Strategic Energy Initiative Investment Fund. Maryland nonprofits often face significant amount of financial constraints that limit their ability to invest in energy-efficient upgrades. HB 145 addresses this issue by offering non-interest financing for a wide variety of green technology, including solar panels and energy efficiency infrastructure. The MEA has proposed amendments, as you guys can see in your packet, that shifts the financial mechanism for the program from SEEF to the Maryland Clean Energy Center, our state's green bank. I'm in full support of MEA's amendments. By promoting the adoption of the renewable energy and energy-efficient practices within the nonprofit sector, HB 145 represents a meaningful step towards a cleaner, greener Maryland. For those reasons, I urge a favorable report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, my name is Henry Bogdan. I'm the Policy Director at Maryland Nonprofits. We're an association representing close to 2,000 organizations, members in every county of the state, in every type of nonprofit activity you can imagine. We're here to support House Bill 145. It fills a niche where nonprofits have a particular need to become more efficient and don't have access to the same tools, and many of which are tax incentives, that are available to private businesses and others. It gives us a chance to be contributing to the state reaching its climate goals. It would help nonprofits operate more efficiently, which would mean that would be more efficient, more effective services when they are government providers and to the general public, the folks who need their services. The range of organizations, while there are 40,000 nonprofit organizations in the state of Maryland, about 3/4 of those are charities, charitable. Only a number of probably 5, 6, 10,000 at the very max would be potential markets for this, but it would be a significant potential market. I mean, this money would get used. As far as the buildings it would improve, or potentially buildings under long-term lease, that's one of the, if you'll see in the bill, that's a factor that's really up to MEA to decide. We do have made capital loans to properties under lease if there were long-term leases in the past in Maryland. I mean, this project is simply a win-win, but those buildings, I just wanted to point out, are dedicated to public purposes. If a nonprofit is going to close down, charity closes down, just as with a major hospital, any other not 501c3 organization, its assets belong to the public. The Attorney General has the power to ensure that those assets are preserved and used for another public purpose that meets the requirements of 501c3 eligibility. So that money is going to, these benefits are going to stay for the public. Thank you very much. Oh, with regard to the amendment, let me say that we would be fine. It doesn't make any difference to us where this would be administered, frankly.
Hi, ECM. Katie Mettle from Advanced Energy United. To keep my testimony short and sweet, me too. We believe that this bill would be good for our members, which includes solar companies and energy storage companies and others as well. And it's good for nonprofits, good for saving people money, good for energy independence. We love it.
Thank you. I think that the issue with this, right, this is I don't want to say a reintroduction because it's not that, but there's a Senate cross-file, right? And it's moved out of the Senate. I think the issue every year has come down to not ECM, but a different committee and the appropriation fund, pun intended, of $5 million. So as we kind of navigate through this, keep that in mind.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, let me just say that the amendment that MEA proposes kind of changes that mechanism. MCEC doesn't just use money from CEF, but it also takes money from private investment, which would lower the threshold. Also, because CEF is a special fund, is technically not, general funds that.
Well, I don't know anymore. The CEF is going to the general fund today.
That's a great question that we'll figure out through this budget process.
Yeah, so crazy times. All right. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you all so much. Is Paul Ellington here? Just want to make sure I give him one more crack to come up. Crickets? Okay. That concludes the bill hearings for today. Thank you all so much, and see you Tuesday.
Thank you. How to work with friends on appropriations.
Thank you so much. It was really, really great. This one.
Thank you.